Good afternoon. This meeting on March 23rd, 2023 will come to order. My name is Mary Jiang, and I'm the president of Oakland Rotary Club, made up of nearly 270 people. The Rotary Club of Oakland is the third oldest club in the Rotary world and one of Rotary's most diverse clubs in the world as well. Our commitment to service above self is carried out throughout our service projects, both locally and internationally. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our 5,429th meeting in the California Ballroom and online. For over 114 years, we have welcomed Rotarians and guests to our club meetings. For those attending online, if you're a visiting Rotarian or a guest of a Rotarian, please enter your name in the chat box located at the center of the screen on the bottom, and so that we can recognize you in a few minutes. If you have comments or want to ask a question of the speaker, please use the chat box. We recommend you view today's meeting using speaker view located in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Now, for our thought for the day, I welcome Rotarian C.J. Hurstfield.
Thank you, President Mary. So we have an extremely timely speaker today. So I wanted to tie into that a little bit. I have two quotes, brief quotes, both from folks who I think are amazing Americans. The first one, climate is what we expect, weather is what we get. Mark Twain. And secondly, we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it. Barack Obama. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ, for that very timely thought for the day. Please join me in reciting the Rotary Vision Statement. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. Okay, guests are welcome to visit our club. Past District Governor and past President Ed Jelen. Do you have any visiting Rotarians?
I don't think so. Are there any visiting Rotarians? Just one, maybe? I am sorry, President Mary, no visiting Rotarians today.
All right. All right. So with any Rotarians who are hosting guests today, please stand, introduce yourself, your occupation, and then introduce your guests.
President Mary, I'm John Protopappas, and I have the pleasure of introducing a special guest. She is a prospective member. And I'm trying, Jason. You know, I like to close deals. I'm trying. She is also the founder of Kalia Homes, a residential real estate company in Piedmont, California, and she's my wife. Carrie McAllister,
Yeah.
Protopappas.
Good afternoon, President Mary and fellow Rotarians. I'm Lorna Padilla Marcus with Moet Mackey and Anderson. It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Wen of Morgan Stanley.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to come back maybe for a future meeting or join a service project. Today, I have the privilege of inducting our 16th new member of the Oakland Rotary Club. Well, Ann Campbell and her sponsor, Keith Uriarte, join me at the lectern. Keith, will you introduce Ann with two interesting facts about her?
President Mary, I wish this was just an introduction. I think it's a homecoming. Ann Campbell Washington, fellow Rotarians, and I am honored to introduce Ann Campbell Washington as our newest Oakland Rotarian member. Ann Campbell is currently the Senior Assistant Dean of Academic Programs and Dean of Students at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Go Bears, right? Ann has been engaged in the Oakland community for some time. She started the campaigns for K to College and Brilliant Baby, which became the foundation for what is today Oakland Promise. Ann was the chief of staff for Mayors Jerry Brown, Jean Quan. She was also my District 4 City Council member and vice mayor. Today, she serves on the board of the Oakland Ballet and on the Capital Campaign Committee of the Oakland Children's Fairyland. That's right. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please welcome my friend and your friend as well, Ann Campbell Washington.
All right. Well, Ann, here's your red badge, which signifies your status as a new member. You will also receive the 4-way test, which guides Rotarians in their daily lives as follows. So you ask, is it the truth, whatever you're doing? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendship? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? You will also, in this bag, a goodie bag, a Rotary Made Easy handbook, which tell you useful information about our club, and a roster with 270 of your newest best friends right now. Here's your Rotary pen as well on the back side.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay, the Rotary pen, wear it proudly, because with this pen, it gives you entrance to any Rotary club in the world. You just call, when you go traveling, go call them, say, I'm visiting Paris. Can I come visit your club? And they will welcome you open arm anywhere you go. So then you also in your goodie bag is a centennial book written by our very own Rotarian historian, Linda Hamilton, covering the first 100 years of Rotary history. Your commitment as a new member is to attend meetings, either in person or online, participate in service activity, conduct your service above self activity, and contribute to the Rotary Foundation, the Oakland Rotary Endowment as donations to the club. It's my pleasure and privilege to induct you as the newest member of the Oakland Rotary Club. Let's give Ann another warm welcome. Right, Danny Mai, could you give an update of what's happening with the Oakland Rotary Endowment campaign?
Good afternoon, Rotarians. I'm President Mary. My name is Danny Mai. I've been a member here in Oakland Rotary for the past 19 years. When I first joined Rotary, I struck a conversation with a gentleman named, well, I'm going to call him Mr. Sage. He told me that he was on the ORE committee, and his committee is responsible for making a difference in our communities. So I asked him, does this committee require asking people for money? He checked on and responded, nobody likes to ask people for money, but if we don't do it, nothing will ever get done. And I was curious. I asked him, what do you mean by that? Well, over the last year, we have contributed 2,000 new books to 1,000 Oakland transitional kindergarten students. We provided almost $14,000 to local teachers to purchase school supplies, $3,100 to supply kitchen equipment to St. Vincent de Paul that serves 700 hot meals, and $80,000 to 8 students who are first in their family to go to college. So I asked him, some of these, items that you just mentioned, isn't it the city of Oakland provide that already? And he said, well, the city of Oakland can do so much, but the rest is up to us to fill in that gap. As I reflect on my conversation with Mr. Sage, I'm so grateful that how Rotary has made a difference in my life. When I was a senior in high school, I applied to 20 college institutions, and I got rejected 19 of them except one, and that is the Rotary of Oakland. I got a scholarship here from the Rotary here of Oakland to attend UC Davis, and I graduated from there. So if you're sitting here today wondering if your money can make a difference in our communities and in my personal life, the answer is yes. It will make a difference, and it can make a difference. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for your generosity. On the table, there's a form for you to fill out to make that contribution. Whether it is small or big, any amount will help tremendously to help our communities and a lot of students here in Oakland. Speaking of making an impact, I don't know if Reggie Young here from the Alameda County. Yes, please come up and talk about your organization, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reggie Young, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alameda County Community Food Bank. And I really appreciate the words that you just said, because one of the things that you mentioned was how this group helps to fill that gap. And that's something that, in my experience, my short experience of being in the Bay Area, that I've seen through as a beneficiary of the generous support of this group here. The challenges that we've been seeing at ACCFB have been immense since the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we were allocating about close to 30 million pounds of food. Right now, we're closer to 50 million pounds of food. Beyond that, we've had to grow our network. We allocate our food research through a subset of partners. Prior to the pandemic, it was 200 or so partners. Right now, we're at 400 community partners. And the reality is that beyond the need for food, costs of food have increased dramatically over that same time period. And so you all know that when you go to the grocery store, you see the price of eggs. They have been dramatically increasing. Those costs are still associated with the things that we have to pay for on an ongoing basis, along with fuel. And all of these things are costly. We are seeing a big challenge within our community, particularly now, because a lot of the supports that our community has had, including emergency SNAP assistance, are going away. And the only thing that's holding back community members from needing more food services are organizations like us, our network of partners, social service programs like SNAP benefits. And the reality is that a lot of those things are going away. It's a critical time for us to come together and really support the needs of our community at a time in which those needs are increasingly high as they've ever been within our network. I want to thank you for the support that you have provided for us, because it goes a long way in helping us to meet that need, and we really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, what's been happening in this month? You guys been watching on TV? Basketball? What's happening? That's it. So anyway, Michael Brock and Gabe Brock is going to give us the Rotarians version of March Madness.
Thank you, President Mary. Last week, Oakland Rotary celebrated the St. Patrick's Day holiday. This week, we're celebrating another really important holiday, March Madness, also known as the NCAA basketball tournament.
Yes, the men's Sweet 16 games start tonight and the women's games start tomorrow.
Now, I'm sure most of the basketball fans here are really familiar with the teams and the brackets and all of that, but I bet you're not that familiar with the team mascots.
Did you know there are 23 teams with the same mascot, including 2 Aggies, 2 Cougars, 2 Wolfpacks, 2 Golden Eagles, and 2 Owls?
The mascots from both St. Mary's College in Moraga and Iona University are the Gales. Does anyone know what a Gale is? No hands, no hand. A Gael is a Gaelic-speaking person from Ireland, Scotland, or the Isle of Man. And just in case you're headed out to the Isle of Man, they actually have 4 Rotary clubs there, and I'm sure President Mary would love a banner from one or more of those clubs.
We also have the Kansas Jayhawks, Iowa Hawkeyes, and the Southeast Missouri State Redhawks. A Jayhawk is not a real bird, but is a combination of a blue jay and a sparrowhawk. Of course, after President Dudley's year, we all know that a Hawkeye is a person from Iowa.
Yes. Yeah, I was waiting for that. Yes, not to be confused with a Hoosier, who is a person from Indiana. I was actually hoping for a matchup between Arizona and Duke, which would produce a Sun Devil versus Blue Devil contest. They could even use some of the Providence College Friars as referees for that game.
That brings us to the Kent State Golden Flashes. Nobody seems to know what that is, but the current mascot wears a golden eagle costume, while the former mascots included a golden retriever and a palomino horse. We all would have enjoyed a game between the Kent State Golden Flashes and the Marquette Golden Eagles.
Now, let's discuss the Furman University Paladins. What is a paladin? I'm glad you asked. A paladin is one of the 12 knights of Charlemagne's court. Another great matchup would have been the Fairleigh Dickinson University Knights versus the Furman University Paladins.
Unfortunately, my college team, the Colorado Buffaloes, did not make the tournament, but a game between the
Wasn't that a great trivial information about March Madness? And I love the Michael Buck's sense of humor. All right, this time, Ruth, could you tell us about an exciting musical play event?
President Mary and fellow Rotarians, I'd like to invite you to join us in an outing on April 1st. We're going to the Berkeley Playhouse, which is a theater for the children in all of us. We'll be seeing Fun Home, a little bit about Fun Home. It is an Emmy Award, Tony Award winning, Best Musical, Best Book for a Musical, and Best Original Score. It is a very fun look at adulthood through the eyes of an adult child looking back at her adult father. It promises to bring empathy and energy to an experience that we maybe all have had a little bit of. Tickets are on sale at the Rotary Club of Oakland website. I want to encourage everybody to bring a kid. I'm bringing a friend of mine who's bringing a kid. It's a great way for us to expose our young people to the fellowship that is Rotary and to build the future as we think about Rotary 2050. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, get your tickets because we have ordered 25 tickets and I believe at least 8 of them been sold already. So we still have some, but they go like hotcakes later. All right, at this point, I'd like to welcome Trish Connors to introduce our speaker.
It is my pleasure to introduce Michael Wehner. His official title is Senior Scientist in Computational Research at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. But more importantly to us, Dr. Wehner's computations focus on extreme weather and climate change. He has been an author on the last 5 national climate assessments and is the lead author on this year's, the 2022 National Climate Assessment, last year's. Given the extreme weather that we've experienced in California this year, we are so fortunate that Dr. Wehner has agreed to share his thoughts with us today. So let's give him a Rotary welcome.
So if we could start the slides, that'd be great. My topic today is rather sobering. I mean, obviously everybody's interested in the weather. The effects of climate change on it are rather profound. We've made a lot of significant advancements in the last few years, and I'd like to give you some details on that. You'll forgive me, I am basically a geek, and if I'm a little too geeky, call me out on it. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is the most important slide. What it says is that I'm speaking on my own behalf and not that of the United States Department of Energy, the University of California, nor the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So I hope they don't advance by themselves. We just heard this quote. There is some question about who actually said it first, but climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. What we mean by that is climate is sort of the long-term description of the weather, but obviously the weather varies from one day to the next. Next slide, please. So I don't really want to dwell on this, but the human influence on climate change has become increasingly clear with almost every year, to the point where now I can say that our best estimate is all of the observed warming, and it's about over a degree, almost 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the pre-industrial times, is due to us, to our consumptions of fossil fuels. I can talk about that more later, but I don't want to talk about that today because I think we want to get into the weather. Get to the next slide, please. What does that mean? We don't live on the global average, so obviously it's not that particularly relevant to our day-to-day lives. Here's some examples of the kinds of extreme weather that we've been looking at. Excuse me, can you go back, please? The one picture was Hurricane Katrina. That one hitting New Orleans. The other one is an atmospheric river up in the upper left. Those are the kinds of storms we've been getting here. Sometimes they have an extratropical cyclone associated with them. That's the kind below. Sometimes you'll hear that called the bomb cyclone, which actually has an interesting history of the word, but the word that I like that comes with it is called bombogenesis, which is when one of these things starts. So next slide, please. So this is a statement from the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that came out this week. That actually it's on. I had the privilege of being one of the lead authors on that report, and it basically says that we have this observed changes in extreme weather, and that our confidence that humans have influenced them has increased a lot since the last report, which I also was on, which was about 7 or 8 years ago. Next slide, please. The next one is a movie. I don't know if it'll start by itself. Now, one of the reasons why we've been able to make progress on this is that the you as taxpayers have invested heavily in high performance computing, these really fast, big supercomputers. And this is a calculation that I did some years ago that really changed things for us. You know, if you look at this picture, you kind of can see that there's storms going in there. If you look at it, it may be hard in the back, but there are hurricanes being simulated, which prior to that we didn't have. And so that enabled us to really make great progress in understanding the effect of global warming on individual extreme weather events. And you can see here, the one on the top is the previous generation of climate models, these computer simulations that we have. And it's just not as detailed. So next slide, please. You go to the next slide. Okay. So what does that mean? I mean, oh, it's pretty blurry. I'm sorry about that. Basically, we've been able to make a statement about hurricanes, and it appears that with climate change, there actually are fewer hurricanes, which might sound like good news. I'll go to the next slide. The bad news is that even if there are fewer, the most intense ones, the category 4s and the category 5s that do all the real damage to those places in the world that get typhoons and hurricanes, is likely to increase. And furthermore, that the strongest ones, the most damaging ones, will be more intense with stronger winds and more rainfall. And especially rainfall, that's where we've made a lot of progress. One of my former students, who has now become an associate dean, which is always fun if you see your students do well, at Stony Brook, has been able to, together we've made a lot of progress on the rainfall in hurricanes and how it's affected by humans. Next slide, please. So when you have an event like we've just had with all these storms, people are always asking me, you know, is this climate change? And that's a good question. But it's not one that we really answer too well, because this is a causality question, which is sort of a deeply philosophical topic in some sense. But you know, a storm is a complex event, and complex phenomena have complex causes. Climate change is only one of those. There are other causes in the weather, for instance, where you can actually quantify various aspects, various causal agents, as it were. Next slide, please. So the questions that I do want to answer, not did climate change cause these storms, or did climate change cause this heat wave, but how have the chances of this particular event been changed by climate, by global warming? You know, is it been made more likely or less likely? A related question that actually is sort of the flip side is, has the magnitude of this event, you know, given that, you know, say the once in 20-year heat wave, has that increased or not? And the next slide will actually show you a simulation that, you know, or an estimate of the human influence on heat waves in California. And I'll stand here and say that any heat wave we have now in California is at least 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer because of climate change. And that actually may sound like a lot, but if it's 105 degrees and all of a sudden it's 109 or up to 110 and all of a sudden it's going to be 114, that has actually profound impacts on human health, particularly those people that don't have access to cooling, be it air conditioning or otherwise, you know, people who work outdoors. My colleague Federico Castillo, who's at the university here, and I are very interested in the effect of heat waves on California's agricultural workers, many of whom are undocumented. They're particularly vulnerable. Next slide, please. So the questions on the impacts of climate change are a little different than these magnitudes. You know, we really want to know, how much did climate change cost this event? These events have financial costs. You know, did climate change make that worse? Many times it did. Or maybe even more to the point, you know, how many people died in this event because of climate change? You know, people died because of the event. Not all of them died because of climate change, but some of them did in many cases. Or even more personally, did climate change flood my house? And I'm going to give you an example of that in the next few slides, so bear with me. Next slide, please. So we looked at Hurricane Harvey, and this next slide is a picture of the flood in Hurricane Harvey. You can see that it was pretty devastating to the greater Houston area. Next slide, please. So this is Hurricane Harvey, just as it made landfall on the coast of Texas, on the Gulf Coast. Next slide, please. And you can't see the numbers here, but what I'm going to tell you is that the reason Harvey was so impactful is that it was a weird storm. It stalled off the coast of Texas and stayed there for several days and dumped copious amounts of water, rainfall in the greater Houston area. And, in some places there was 5 feet of rain in 7 days. You can drown in that. And indeed 70 people did. Next slide, please. I told you this wasn't all good news. In fact, there isn't a whole lot. So Hurricane Harvey was, no pun intended, or maybe the pun's intended, a watershed moment for us who were thinking about hurricanes and climate change, because there were 3 independent studies, one of which was led by Mark Risser and myself at the lab. And we all came up with different estimates of how much more rainfall there was because of global warming. But all of our estimates, although they appear to be different, they actually are within what we call the confidence interval, or our guess of how large the ranges were overlapping. And so we were quite confident that that humans burning of fossil fuels made this a wetter event. Our best estimate across these 3 independent studies is by 20%, which is a large number. Next slide, please. Now, so there's more rain. What did that do to the flood? Well, I was at a conference and I met a fellow who had a flood model, and he had a good simulation of the actual flood. And I said, well, could we simulate the flood that might have been had climate change not increased precipitation by 20%? He said, sure. So we just reran these relatively accurate simulations of the real flood with less rainfall from the observations, which is that little map there. Then the next slide, and hopefully this will show up, because I do have, so hopefully you can see this. So the flood that was, the real flood is on your left in South Houston, which is a neighborhood I chose because there were 9,000 flooded homes there. We did it actually for all the different estimates, but this is the best estimate. And you can see that there are areas where, around the edges, that the extra 20% of rainfall increased the flooded area. And in fact, it made the flood about 3 feet deeper in this particular neighborhood. And over the whole greater Houston area, there was 14% more flooded area because of climate change. Next slide, please. So getting at this question, how much did it cost? So I said, well, okay, if a 20% increase in rain made 14% more flooded area, if we assume that everything was equally valued and distributed uniformly, and the insured losses were estimated at $90 billion, that 14% of that was due to climate change. So say that $13 billion of the total cost of Hurricane Harvey was attributable to human activities. But we can do better than that, actually, it turns out. And I met another young scientist at Louisiana State University, Kevin Smiley. Next slide, please. And what he did is he took those maps that I just showed you, which are actually very detailed. They have a resolution of about 100 feet on a side, so about the size of a suburban Texas house and yard. And he applied it to census and real estate data. And we found this picture of Harris County, and it's probably hard to see from that distance. Maybe the people online can see it better. But the damages were not uniformly distributed. And the next slide, please. And so we found that of all the homes that were flooded, and there were many, about a third of them in our best estimate were flooded because of climate change. And so NOAA estimated the total insured plus uninsured losses at $120 billion. And so I could revise that cost estimate to be 40 billion, which is an astonishingly large number. and is in fact much larger than what standard estimates of the cost of climate change are, which is another interesting research question for us. We also found an environmental injustice, or what I call a quantification of environmental injustice, where we put numbers on this. And about a half of the flooded homes were low-income Hispanic households. But the overall population of that county is only about a third low-income Hispanic. So that the flood did not affect each socioeconomic group equally. Next slide, please. So I call this end-to-end attribution. So global warming caused about 1 degree centigrade, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, warming in the Gulf Coast waters off of Texas. That led to about 20% more rain, which led to 14% more flooded area. Could you go back, please? And that led to about a third more houses. Go back, yeah, that one. And so, like I mentioned, that we could also use the census data to see that impoverished households were disproportionately affected. The last time I gave this talk, somebody asked me, is it always the case that poor people are disproportionately affected by climate change in these weather events? And the answer is no. Sometimes they're not. I mean, oftentimes they are. In this case, they were. In other cases, they were. But it's true that low-income people, whether they're in this country or in other nations, are the least responsible for climate change, and that they've burned less fuel, contributed less to the changes in the atmosphere, to the increases in carbon dioxide. And they also are the least capable to adapt and recover from these disasters. Next slide, please. I think I have something about our storms. Yes, and so this was the first of the big bomb cyclone atmospheric rivers. And I did a study that was actually commissioned by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which was the first time we had ever done something like this. It was very local. And we came up with an estimate that there was probably a very conservative statement of 5% more rain, probably 10% is what we think we're looking at now. Rain year for each of these storms, especially these are the really big storms we got. Not all the storms we've had in the last month are big, but each of the big storms is about 10% wetter because of climate change on average. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, the human influence on climate is not really, something we can debate. I mean, it's pretty clear. And we can quantify this effect not on the overall climate. This is the climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. We can quantify what we get. And it's actually rather disturbing, I think, because the impacts are large. And we're at the global warming level is at 1.2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The Paris Agreement targets you may have heard of are 1.5 and 2 degrees. We're going to see those, and we're going to go right by them. It's very unlikely that we can limit global warming to 2 degrees above centigrade, above pre-industrial, and 1.5 degrees. Could even happen as soon as next year, depending on how big the El Nino is. And so we have to be prepared for that. Knowledge is power, and so that's something we can use to adapt. My personal goal is to take this thing I've been calling end-to-end attribution, going from the warming to the impacts, so that developing nations can use it to make defensible claims to something called the Loss and Damages Fund, which was just surprisingly approved by something called the Conference of Parties, which is a United Nations group that met in Cairo last year. And it's not clear there's any money yet, but you look at a place, maybe a place like Houston, is in a rich country like ours, we can afford to recover. But there were recent floods in, say, Pakistan, and there's not a rich country. And climate change, I don't know what the numbers are because I haven't run the simulations, but I am sure that there was a human influence on it. And so since Pakistan contributed something like 0.00004% to the current global warming, and we've done about a third, there is an injustice there. Next slide, please. I think this is my last one. So I hope what I've made clear is that this is not some distant problem. This is not our grandchildren's problem, not our children's problem. It's ours. It's here and now. And the sooner we accept that fact, and the sooner we can start doing something about it. So I'm happy to take questions.
Michael, thank you for your presentation here.
Sorry, it's so depressing.
I'm a practical thinker, and so my question for you is, what is the number one thing, what is the number one action step for us to take on a systemic level and on an individual level to avert further climate crisis?
That's a really good question. I get asked it a lot, and I have an answer. And that the single most important thing that you and I can do is vote. And vote for people that, be careful what I say, are not in the pocket of the vested interests. And our politics today is very divided, and that makes us somewhat dysfunctional to deal with these very complicated and expensive problems. I mean, none of the solutions are cheap. At the end of the day, what we do as a society need to do is not reduce our dependence on coal, oil, and natural gas, but eliminate it. Because every time we burn gasoline, we're putting a little more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which it's going to make it a little bit warmer. This is not an easy thing to do. We have to completely revamp our ways of getting energy. But the IPCC this week, maybe over optimistically, but is optimistic and says, we have these technologies. What we need is the will. Thank you.
Thank you.
You said that causality is a philosophical topic. Would you expand very briefly on that?
Well, I'm not a philosopher, although PhD stands for Doctor of Philosophy, which is an inside joke here. What I mean by that is that, because it's a complicated subject, it can lead you to often be confused about, what's important and what's not. And so I think that's about as far as I can go into it, is that it's not like, if I eat something, I'm no longer hungry. That's clearly, the effect of my hunger going away has been eating. But on the other hand, how come there's food for me? That's how you can kind of go down a rabbit hole and get confused. And so I try to keep it simple and make these questions not what caused this event, but rather how did climate change influence it? So how did it cause it to be more frequent, or how did it cause it to be larger? And so I'm a simple man. Thank you.
So when I think about, how we impact climate change, you think about California's politics and some of the goals to eliminate carbon emissions by a certain year. And then there's also goals at the United States level to eliminate carbon emissions by a certain year. But we live in a world that has many policies, many governments, many countries that may or may not conform. How do you integrate the policies of the world? And I know there's some underdeveloped countries, for example, that are looking towards the developed countries and their policies. But you think of a country like China, for example, which is not, it's a large country that can have an impact on what we do. So how do you integrate some of those global policies?
Well, this is something I'm certainly not an expert in, because this is political science. What I can say is that the United States has been, over time, the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide being the biggest one. China now is the current largest emitter. They just haven't been doing it as long. And so China is a big part of the the equation here to make a solution to reduce our greenhouse gases. I think, this is me personally speaking, I think the United States is as the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world has to lead by example. And our example hasn't been all that great until recently. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is only been a year old or so, is a really positive step forward. It's not nearly enough, but at least it's in the right direction. And so I think, coordinating amongst the different nations may even be possible. I don't know. But if we don't do it as our nation, then nobody else is gonna. I have 1 minute for questions. So
Thank you very much for your talk. As horrifying as it is very fascinating. So I heard on PBS several years ago a very astute documentary about some scientists that were blaming global warming on the fact that the poles are changing on the planet, the poles are reversing.
it's just wrong.
Okay,
It's just wrong.
thank you.
I get all sorts of quack emails. I got one recently. You'll love this one. That the guy says the climate is changing, and it's because this sun is spiraling towards the center of the Milky Way. I was unaware of that.
Thank you for your talk, and I particularly like your comments relating to social justice issue portion of this discussion. My question is more regional. What are we looking for long-term with these changes in terms of, right, this year we've got tons of water, tons of snow, but with the temperature going up, the snowpack on average is lower. I mean, what's the projection for us regionally in terms of water, which is a huge issue?
That's a great question. And I have a young colleague, Alan Rhodes, at the laboratory, who has written a lot on the Sierra snowpack. And this year, of course, it's huge. But as we warm, and some amount of warming, which we get to choose, is inevitable, more and more of the precipitation we get will fall as rain instead of snow. So at the end of the century, under a very dire scenario where we're 3.5 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial, there would be no snow in the Sierras. That has profound implications for California water resource management. You cannot build enough dams to replace the snowpack reservoir that we have, which means that difficult decisions would have to be made. I don't think you're going to cut the cities off, but California's agricultural business, which is, billions or trillions of dollars a year, I don't know how big, but huge, one of the most important breadbaskets in the world, would not be able to be sustained if we don't have a snowpack reservoir. And so I'm very concerned about this. I tried to highlight this in the California climate assessment. I don't think the right people are listening. So if you know them, have them call me.
Michael, thank you for being with us today. Rotary has adopted protecting the environment as one of its 7 areas of focus. Although we've been doing things for many years, we adopted that as a primary goal of the entire Rotary International world. About 2 years ago, I believe, we also had a speaker talking somewhat similarly to what you're talking about. My friends that are climate deniers, one of the things they talk about is that there's always this ebb and flow of temperature over the history of the world. And professor who is here was, I believe, from UCLA. And one of the things he talked about that's been helpful to me, and it's difficult to say, well, 3 degrees here and there, that kind of, some people would say, who cares about 3 degrees? What he talked about was there are these historical trends, but some of it's just bad luck. I mean, if we're in a trend historically, but how much is affected not by bad luck, but by us, our influence on climate change. But that bad luck, that at least accepts some of the argument, but we still have to focus on what we did.
I think we've changed our luck is the problem. We always have good luck and bad luck, but we've changed the balance to more bad luck in terms of extreme weather. And, yeah, the climate change denier will always say, well, it used to be, 5 degrees warmer when the dinosaurs were out there. And it's like, yeah, that's true. No doubt about it. But the rate at which climate is changing is unprecedented. And indeed, this year is the warmest year that any human being has ever lived in. Ever. Thank you.
If we have people have questions, can they ask you after the meeting, Michael? So Tom, you can ask him your question later. All right. So, Michael, thank you very much for that climatic presentation. Education is my area of focus for this year. The Rotary Club of Oakland is proud to partner with the Oakland Promise that Ann co-founded, to offer 8 $10,000 scholarship annually along with mentorship. We are proud to support many as the first in their family to attend college. In recognition of your presentation today, Oakland Rotary will make a donation in your name to the Oakland Promise to support its kindergarten to college program for every child in our city. Thank you. Well, Ann and Keith, please proceed to the back of the ballroom so Rotarians can greet you as they leave today. Anna Marie, will you tell us about next week's speaker?
I'd be happy to, President Mary. By a quick show of hands, how many Rotarians here care about law enforcement? Let's see some hands. Excellent. Then you cannot miss next week. We have our top law enforcement officer for the County of Alameda, our new sheriff, Yesenia Sanchez. So I would encourage you to come, get your friends to go online. Let's have a huge showing so that she leaves with the impression of how much might there is in this Rotary audience. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, CJ, for the thought for the day and for joining us as a new member today. Danny Mai for the ORE campaign rollout. Rustro for informing us about the musical play. Trisha for introducing our speaker. Michael for an awesome presentation. Anna Marie for the teaser. And the production team for managing the meeting and keep us on time. Rotarians and guests, please, immediately before you leave, remove all your lunch trash and your personal belonging from the table so that the kind Rotarians that's doing cleanup can clear the room quickly and efficiently. Like your mama says, clear your table. And so share, which means thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.